Hare Krishna. Please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada and Guru Maharaj. So today, as part of our Bhakti Sastri, we will start our discussion on Śrī Īśopaniṣad. So the Īśopaniṣad appears as the last chapter in the Yajurveda. So the Yajurveda, as you know, has two parts, the Shukla, which is called the white Yajurveda, and the Krishna, or the dark Yajurveda. So this appears as the last chapter in this Veda. And it takes its name from the first word of the first verse. The first mantra is Ishavasimidam Sarvam Yat Kinch Jagatam Jagat. So Isha is the first word of the first mantra, and that's how it gets the name Īśopaniṣad. And Isha, you will recognize, is the root word of Ishvara. So Ishvara is the controller. So essentially, as you can guess, it talks about the potency of the Lord, a little different from the typical Vaishnava scriptures that talk a lot about the personal aspect of the Lord. This talks more about the powers and the potencies of the Lord. So some more details. So for the Upanishads, four things are generally mentioned. That which is the rishi that recited the Upanishad, and in this case it is Swayambhavu Manu, the son of Lord Brahma. What is the object of worship? And that is specifically Lord Yajna. So it's mentioned that once Swayambhavu Manu was attacked by many Rakshasas, and they were so powerful that Swayambhavu Manu was fearful of his own life. And at that time, he chanted these mantras to attract the mercy of Lord Yajna. Lord Yajna is one of the incarnations of Lord Vishnu. So Lord Yajna, pleased by this recitation, came and killed the Rakshasas. So the object of worship or the Devta is Lord Yajna. The chanda, which is the meter in which the mantra is recited, it varies. We'll see there are 3 or 4 different meters. And again, the viniyog or the application also varies because the Upanishad takes us through different stages of realizations. So the 4 anubandhas of the book. So first is, who should be reading this book? What are the qualifications of a person reading a book? And that is mentioned that a devotee like Swayambhavu Manu. One should be a practicing devotee. What is the subject of the book? That is the Abhidaya, right? Also called the Vishaya. The subject of the book is the mercy of Lord Vishnu. As we can see that Lord Yajna came and he relieved Swayambhavu Manu of his difficult predicament. So that is the subject, which is the mercy of Lord Vishnu. What is the result? What is the prayojan? And the prayojan is the liberation or the mukti of the devotees. And what is the element connecting these 3? So the reader, the subject, and the result, like the adhikari, the vishay, and the prayojan, they're all connected by Lord Vishnu. So that is Sambandh. So in other words, the book revolves around the relationship of a devotee with the Lord, how that relationship is actually manifested in terms of practice, and what is the result of that practice. Few words about the commentary. by Srila Prabhupada. So, Īśopaniṣad has a fantastic introduction, and we'll spend some time in this discussion going over the introduction. So this was delivered as a lecture titled The Teachings of the Vedas by Prabhupada in Conway Hall, London, England. So it was in 1969, October 6th. So that lecture is actually transcribed and placed as an introduction to the Īśopaniṣad. Now, interestingly, the purports are also not the typical way in which Srila Prabhupada rendered purports, in which he would uh, read the words, give the word-to-word translation, the English translation, and the purport. He actually wrote it as a series of articles in the Back to Godhead magazine, and this is long before he established ISKCON. So as you know that before he established ISKCON, Srila Prabhupada was in lines of his own Guru Maharaj. Bhakti Saraswati Thakur had this publication called Sajjan Toshini, and which was essentially very similar. Srila Prabhupada in that mood started this Back to Godhead magazine, and he would write articles, he would get others to write it, he would get it printed himself in Chipperwada, Delhi, and then he would actually go and distribute it himself. So the 18 mantras that are in this Upanishad, Srila Prabhupada wrote it as 18 articles, and these have been then essentially assembled together to produce the book, which was released in 1969 by the BBT Press in New York. When you read the book, you will see that there are some references to some of the books that Prabhupada wrote later on, and these have been added when the book was published. Like at one point you'll see a reference to Prabhupada's commentary on Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu right now. When he wrote the article, he had still not written this book, but when the book was printed, at that time he had written the book, so those references have been placed later on. So let's look at the introduction written by Prabhupada. I will not go para by para, but rather cover it topically. And this is what will be the way of the coverage of the Īśopaniṣad. Prabhupada writes comprehensive purports. Of course, the recommendation is to read them before you listen to the lectures, so you have an understanding of the purports. I will be commenting topically on the purports to extract a little bit more the message that Srila Prabhupada is conveying. Right? So, one of the first things that Srila Prabhupada speaks about in the introduction, he does not use this terminology, but essentially he covers it topically. What is known as the epistemology of ontology, right? So these are two words in this term, epistemology and ontology. So ontology is basically the study of spiritual knowledge or metaphysical knowledge. So like you have biology, which is a study of living beings. So ontology is the study of spiritual knowledge. Epistemology is a branch of science that deals with the source of knowledge. And so where do we get that knowledge from? So if you combine the two terms, the epistemology of ontology and essentially is telling us where do we get spiritual knowledge from. Right? The spiritual knowledge is ontology, and the epistemology is trying to search for a source for spiritual knowledge. So what are the typical sources of of knowledge. So in three broad categories, we have what is known as pratyaksha, which is empirical, based on senses, and a majority of science is based on pratyaksh, based on observations, right? Then the second is anuman, which is inductive. Inductive is based on intellect, where based on one's observation, one is able to predict something else. Right? Like a lot of the subatomic physics, quantum physics, that does not lend itself to pratyaksh, but it is inductive. That based on secondary observations, one derives the the knowledge of quantum physics, relativity. So that is anuman. And the third is shabda, and shabda is word which is somebody tells you, and that is of course based on faith. So we have these three sources of knowledge based on our senses, based on our intellect, based on faith: pratyaksha, anuman, and shabda praman. So in trying to determine the relative strengths of these three ways of getting knowledge, we also look at the challenges in getting knowledge in these three ways. Right? So it begins with acknowledging the defects that are common to all humans. Comes into four categories. The first is karnapata, which is defective perception, right? Which essentially means imperfect senses. So what does it mean, imperfect senses? So it means that we cannot see very far away. We cannot hear beyond a certain frequency. Sometimes what we see is also distorted. So what does it do is it limits reality because of the imperfect senses. A person might say that light is whatever I can see. So the reality is there is also light in the ultraviolet ray area, in the infrared, but because we cannot see it, we cannot acknowledge it based on our senses, right? So that is because of our imperfect senses. Then the second is Brahma, or mistake. So the root cause of Brahma is that mistaking the body as the self. So this is more subtle now, that because we mistake the body as the self, we are not able to perceive things correctly. Things like consciousness, awareness, the modes, we are not able to perceive them. So science will always try to find a chemical basis for it. That if a person is in this mode or that mood, there is serotonin and there is different hormones that are coming. That's because that's the level of the perception of science. And because of that, Brahma, or mistakes, are happening. Then pramad is illusion, or being deluded, which essentially disconnects the mind and the senses. Okay. So what does it mean? That the senses are perceiving something and the mind is interpreting it as something else. So we sit in a magic show and the magician in front of us, he is performing some trick and the senses are perceiving something. That he puts a pigeon in the cap. Now actually speaking, he's by a slight sleight of hand, he's putting the pigeon somewhere else, but we don't see it. Right? So our mind is seeing something different from what the senses are perceiving. So we feel that the magician has made the pigeon disappear. So that is illusion. The fourth is vipralipsa, which is cheating. Right? So the first three are inadvertent, that we don't plan on it. We can't do anything about our imperfect senses. We can't do anything about a propensity to do mistakes. We can't do anything about the fact that we are illusioned. But vipralipsa is that we deliberately cheat either ourselves or others. And what vipralipsa does is it takes the previous three defects and it magnifies them. So it creates an a magnified impact of the other defects that we have, but deliberately. So we leverage that to our advantage because of our propensity to cheat. So because of the imperfect senses, we make mistakes. Because of the mistakes, we go under illusion, and because of that, we develop the cheating propensity. So the result of the imperfect senses is that we are unaware. It's error in perception. We do not know that there is ultrasound. We do not know there is infrared. So we are completely unaware. So how we perceive the universe. We have our senses, they see some things and some things we don't see. So what we see, and what we don't see, we are unaware of it. Because of mistakes, we see something and some things we don't see, and what we see we mistake it for something else. So this is an error in judgment. The thing with the mistakes is that we are aware of them, right? So with imperfect senses, we are not aware of what we don't know, but mistake, you do a mistake and you are aware of it, that yes, this is a mistake that is done. With illusion, there is an error in feeling. So feeling in the sense that sometimes a person may make a mistake and you go to the person and say you made a mistake, and he will deny it. Maybe because of ego, maybe because of fear, right? So this is not what you see but what you feel, right? So because of illusion, you see a mirage when there is no water. And cheating propensity is misrepresentative, which is error in our motivation, right? So because of these four defects, there are four kind of errors. There is an error in perception, error in judgment, error in feeling, and error in our motivation, right? And everyone who is fallible, which is everyone in this material world, suffers from these four defects, maybe by different extents. Maybe in some cases the cheating propensity is higher than others. Maybe some people are more careful to not make mistakes. But nevertheless, whether the degree is reduced or increased, everybody suffers from these four defects, except for those who are liberated, right? So in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, it is said that mistakes, illusion, cheating, and defective perceptions do not occur in the saying of the authoritative sages. So putting it all together, we started off by saying that the sources of knowledge are empirical, inductive, or by word. And then we also talked about the four defects, right? So because we have imperfect senses, then pratyaksh praman will always be limited, right? Because if you're gaining knowledge through our empirical senses, and the fact that our senses are imperfect, it means that knowledge will be imperfect. Because of our propensity to commit mistakes, and because of our illusion, our intellect will also not be perfect. So the second way of getting knowledge was inductive, anuman, which is based on intellect, but the intellect is limited by Brahma and Pramad. So for a conditioned jiva, anuman is also going to give incomplete or incorrect results. Now the third is Shabda, or based on faith. Now as long as we are getting this Shabda from one who is Vipralipsa or who has cheating propensity, Shabda itself will be contaminated. Right? So if I sit and listen to somebody and the person is either consciously or unconsciously cheating me, then there's no value to the words that the person will speak. And this is the situation in the age of Kali. There are so many people who are sitting and speaking so many words, and there are people sitting and listening to them based on faith, but it's cheating going on. The person who's speaking is cheating, the person who's sitting is being cheated. However, if we get the words from a perfect source, like the sages, through the perfect media, like the parampara, then the shabda becomes perfect, because there is no more vipralipsa, there is no more cheating. So what is the conclusion? That if we get the shabda or the word from the perfect source, that knowledge will be perfect. So we have established conclusively the epistemology for the ontology. What is the best source for getting spiritual knowledge? The best source of getting spiritual knowledge is from the perfect source, that is Krishna, through the perfect media, which is the parampara, and this is nothing but the Vedas, right? So this is the epistemology, which is that we get our knowledge from Krishna through the parampara, and the ontology is that the knowledge then appears in the Vedas. So this is a busy slide, and I'll summarize it. So the Vedic knowledge is also known as Trayoprasthan because it is divided into three categories: Shruti, Smriti, and Nyaya. So Shruti is revealed absolute truth. Right. So each and every word in the Shruti is fixed. The incantation is fixed, the order is fixed, nothing can be changed. Like Shruti is translates to heard. That means it is heard from the guru to the disciple and passes on in the parampara. And the Shruti prominently contains the Vedas, the Chatur Vedas, the Rig, Yajur, Sam, and Atharva Veda. Each Veda itself is divided into four parts. The Samhitas. So Samhita is essentially mantras for the Grahasthas in terms of Karma Kand. Then the Brahmanas, they are for the Brahmacharis, and these are the explanation of the mantras and also the process of learning the rituals. The Aranyakas are for the Vanaprasthas, and they give further more esoteric explanation of the mantras. They are meant to develop detachment in the Grahastha, because the Vanaprastha is a transition stage. So the Aranyakas, they detach the Grahasthas from the Samhitas, which is Karma Kand or enjoyment, to detachment. And then the fourth is the Upanishad, which is meant for the sannyasis, and this is Gyan Kand, which gives the philosophy of the Brahman. Right? And the reason Prabhupada talks about it is because we are going to be talking about Īśopaniṣad. So he wants us to understand that it is a part of the Vedas. The Shrutis also contain Upavedas, which are Upa means minor, and we have Vedas like Upavedas like Dhanurved, Ayurved, so different kinds of. They mostly deal with material sciences. Like Dhanurved is for weapons, Ayurveda is for medicine. So they have different sciences over there. And then the Vedangas are considered to be supporting angas. That before you can approach a Veda, you have to be qualified in different sciences before you can read the Vedas. So things like Shiksha, which is pronunciation, Vyakran, grammar, Nirukt, which is etymology, Chanda, which is meter, Jyotish, Kalpa. So these are all the supporting angas which qualifies one to read the Vedas. Right. So this is the Shruti. The second part is Smriti, which means by memory, also means meditation. And so these are composed by the sages, and the wordings can change from age to age. So prominent amongst the Smritis are the Puranas. And so we have 18 major Puranas and 18 minor Puranas. And there are even more, not just these 36, there are even more Puranas. So the 18 major Puranas, as you know, are divided amongst the Sattvic, Rajvik, and Tamasic. And the Bhagavad Purana is the one that is most popular amongst the Vaishnavas. So Puranas essentially is a collection of pastimes. And they illustrate the points, the philosophical points that are made in the Vedas. So the Vedas may make a particular point, a philosophical point, and it is illustrated by a historical pastime in the Puranas. Then the Smriti has other parts also. So they have the six darshans, which are mostly, which are supporting in some way the overall understanding. So what the Vedas do is that they also cover the dissension to the Veda. Like if somebody says, I challenge the Vedas because of these reasons, those challenges have been organized in the sixth darshan. Like so, like the Vaisheshika darshan, it is mostly atheistic. It talks about science, metaphysics. Right, Nyaya by Gautam, it is mostly about epistemology and logic. Like Mimamsha, which is Jaiminis, it is mostly about sense gratification. Right, Sankhya is mostly about analysis. So what the Vedas do is rather than waiting for others to attack the knowledge, they actually attack themselves, and then they also refute the attacking. Right, so the person says that I want to say that Krishna is God. Now somebody might say that Krishna is not God, Shiva is God. So let us take that into consideration. Right? So the person is essentially taking dissenting views and then addresses them proactively. Right? That's what is done in the darshans. The itihas are historical accounts. So the Puranas, they are historical accounts, but they're not organized either in chronology or in terms of storyline. Like in the Bhagavad Purana, you will see so many different historical accounts. Dhruv Maharaj, Prahlad Maharaj, then Krishna's pastimes, Prithu Maharaj. So many different personalities, and they come in all different time scale. Itihas is clustered around a particular personality, and it develops chronologically. Like it has literally means history. So like we see in Mahabharata, it's clustered around the Pandavas, and it kind of goes chronologically from the point that the Pandavas are born till they grow up, they fight, etc. Similarly, Ramayana is around Lord Ram, right? With Lord Ram's appearance, and then his banishment, battle with Ravan, etc. So they are more linear. And then there are others like the Pancharatras. Pancharatras are dealing mostly with Vaishnava worship, Tantras, and ritual worships. So the two prasthans, Shruti and Smriti. The third is Nyaya. The Nyaya contains the Vedanta Sutras and written by Srila Vyasadeva, and it has 555 sutras that essentially summarize the teachings of the Vedas. So the Vedas may teach the same thing at different places in slightly different ways. The Vedanta Sutras relate all of them and present them in very terse as quotes. They present them. Right? So essentially, by understanding the Vedanta Sutras, you can understand the Vedas. But the Vedanta Sutras are very difficult to decode. Right? So this is the whole Vedic knowledge. And then the dotted portion is those who do not support the Vedas, like Nastik. And Nastik is those who are not Astik, they don't take shelter. Under that, we have Buddhism, Jainism, and Charvakism, which essentially deny the existence of, of God. Now, all these are also covered under the darshans, but these are mentioned, and they are not comprehensive by any means. These are the non-Vedic. So Srila Prabhupada makes this point that everything is Vedic. Right? So non-Vedic means that those who do not accept the Vedas. That is non-Vedic. Because the Vedas talk about theology, they talk about material sciences, they even talk about the challenges to theology, they even talk about atheism. So everything is in the Vedas. So there is nothing that there's no branch of knowledge that is non-Vedic. So when the term non-Vedic is used, it is essentially people who do not accept the Vedas, people like Lord Buddha or Jain or Charvakrishi. Okay. Prabhupada says in the Science of Self-Realization that the Vedas are the original source of knowledge, and whatever knowledge is required in human society is present in the Vedas. Right? And philosophies that do not accept the authority of the Vedas are called non-Vedic. So with this context, let's take a little bit of a look at the books by Srila Prabhupada. So this is a summation of what we had, the Vedas, the Trayoprasthan, Shruti, Smriti and Nyaya. So the Īśopaniṣad, it comes under Shruti, specifically under the category of Upanishad. The Bhagavad Gita, as you know, it comes in Mahabharata, which is an itihas in the category of Smriti. Bhagavad Gita is also considered to be an Upanishad because of the content. That even though it comes as a conversation between Krishna and Arjuna, but its structure is very much like that of an Upanishad, where it deals with deep philosophical topics. That's why Bhagavad Gita is also known as Gita Upanishad. And then under Nyaya comes Srimad Bhagavatam, which is actually a Puran, but Jiva Goswami makes this point that even though the Bhagavatam is a Puran, but it is also a commentary on the Vedanta Sutras. So in the Bhagavatam we see in the first canto, 6th chapter, that when Srila Vyasadeva composed the Vedas and wrote the Vedanta Sutras, he was still unhappy. And then Narad Muni instructed him. So then he writes a commentary on the Vedanta Sutras in the Srimad Bhagavatam. And so that's why even though Srimad Bhagavatam is technically a Mahapuran, but it is also considered to be a Vedanta Sutra because it's a commentary on it. Okay. So as practicing devotees, we have Vedic books, and this now I'm talking about the books that Srila Prabhupada has given us. So the Bhagavad Gita and the Īśopaniṣad are specifically Vedic books, right? So anybody who is a follower of the Vedas would be reading these books. Srimad Bhagavatam is, while it is Vedic, it is more read by the Vaishnavas because it's all centered around Krishna. And Gaudiya Vaishnavas, they would read Nectar of Devotion, Nectar of Instruction, Chaitanya Charitamrita, because they're specifically written in the lineage of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Right? So it's not that Gaudiya Vaishnava is outside Vedic. They're Vedic, but it's a subcategorization of the Vedic literature. So for Bhakti Sastri, we have uh, the books like Īśopaniṣad and Bhagavad Gita, which talk about the goal, the sadhya, like Krishna. What is the purpose of devotional life, right? So Īśopaniṣad talks about the absolute truth. The Bhagavad Gita actually reveals his name. So in Īśopaniṣad, we'll see that there is no mention of Krishna. There is only mention of the more generic terms of absolute truth or other indirect references. But in Bhagavad Gita, that absolute truth is named. That yes, your goal is Krishna Swayam Bhagavan. Then in the nectar of devotion and nectar of instruction, the process is given on how to attain that named person. So by reading the Īśopaniṣad and Bhagavad Gita, we now understand that there is an absolute truth, and the name of that absolute truth is Krishna. How do you attain it? That is explained in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Nectar of Devotion, and Updeshamrita, Nectar of Instruction. And sadhaka, which is us, how do we relate to the sadhya and sadhana? That is mentioned in all the 4 books by Srila Prabhupada in his purports and by references in the books themselves. So that is why Prabhupada had these 4 books together, because they systematically help us understand the sadhya, the goal, the sadhana, the process, and the sadhaka, the devotee. So Srila Prabhupada notes that the Krishna consciousness movement is completely authorized from Vedic principles because of this reason, because of the books and the literature that he gives us. It mimics the process that is enunciated in the Vedas. So we'll talk a little bit about Upanishad, because this topic after all is Īśopaniṣad. So as I mentioned earlier on, they're called the head of the Vedas, the sannyasis. They're meant for the sannyasis, and they present the conclusion of the Vedas. So they are very philosophical. Literally, Upa means near and Nishadati means to bring. So Upanishad means to bring closer. And one of the meaning is that it brings us closer to our goal, which is Krishna, brings us closer to our philosophical understanding. Upanishad also means that sit closer to the Guru. Upanishad means come and sit closer to the Guru, because the Upanishads can only be understood under the guidance of a Guru. The nature of the Upanishads is that they are very cryptic. It is difficult to unpack it on your own. So Upanishad is also known as Brahma Vidya and Rahasya Vidya. Right? It is confidential knowledge imparted by the Guru to the disciple, or self-realized Guru. Right? Upanishad can also be divided into saying Upa means near and Ni means certainly, and Sad meaning to loosen. So that means that knowledge that certainly loosens one's material binding. So one thing that you will note is that in the Bhagavad Gita, the mention is that of shlokas. Like we say shloka 1, Dharmkshetra, Kurukshetra 1.1. But in the Upanishad, the verses are mentioned as mantras, manatrayate, that the recitation of which frees one mind. That is the difference between Vedas and Puranas. So Vedas, as we shared, that nothing can be changed in the Vedas. the order of the syllables, the enunciation, nothing can be changed. And they are known as mantras. For the Puranas, there is flexibility. From time to time, from one day of Brahma to another, from one yuga to another, the words may be changed or rearranged. So they are known as shlokas. In the Bhagavad Gita, you will see shlokas that appear very similarly in other places. Also, some words may be changed here and there. So it's kind of like this, that if a teacher is teaching the student um, certain principles, then the principles have to be defined very, very precisely. That E is equal to mc square, right? That cannot change. You can say A is equal to M and maybe A times BC square, right? That can't be changed. So that is like the mantra. Now, the teacher may also describe that mantra, right? Might describe that equation, saying that energy is mass times the square of the speed of light. Now, he can also say that energy is mass and then it needs to be multiplied by the square of the speed of light. So he can phrase that differently. The message does not change, but the wording can change, right? That's the difference between mantras and shlokas. So the Vedas are written in Vedic Sanskrit. So Vedic Sanskrit is never spoken. Spoken in the sense that it is not used conversationally. Nobody will speak to one another in Vedic Sanskrit. It is only chanted during yajnas or during teachings. So in this Vedic mantras, the swara and krama, which is the meter and the construct, they never change. In the shlokas, both can change. The swar can change and the kram can change. So the point is made that the Īśopaniṣad that we are studying, the mantras, was the same Īśopaniṣad that appeared in the first day of Brahma. Nothing changes there. But on the other hand, we know that the Mahabharata that was originally spoken had 1 billion verses, and then it was reduced to 100,000 verses when it came to the Earth planet. So many verses were removed, many verses were summarized. The storyline remained the same, but the level of details and additional storylines were trimmed. Now, the Puranas, they are written in Vedic Sanskrit. So Vedic Sanskrit, they are structured in a way that even if the construct changes, the meaning is preserved, right? Because the words, they preserve the relationship with one another, right? And this, those who are Sanskrit scholars can explain it better, but the way the verses are, that even if the words move around, then the meanings don't change there. And this is there because of the fact that they are spoken and heard and repeated. And there is a third kind of Sanskrit that is known as Laukic Sanskrit, which is spoken or colloquial Sanskrit, right? So the Upanishads are in Vedic Sanskrit, the Puranas are in Vedic Sanskrit, and conversational Sanskrit is called Laukic Sanskrit. Okay, so the next discussion would be on the invocation, and we will pause at this point and do the invocation in the next discussion. So we covered the introduction by Srila Prabhupada to the Īśopaniṣad, which essentially was a description of the construct and structure of Vedic knowledge, the position of the Upanishad, and a better understanding of the antecedents of the Īśopaniṣad. So we'll stop here, and next discussion will be on the invocation mantra. Srila Prabhupada ki Jai.